President.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, I just want to reiterate my gratitude for my colleagues, our staff who have worked night and day, literally, and all of those who have brought us to this point. We are going to reopen government. We're going to ensure that federal employees, whether they were furloughed or laid off or forced to work without pay, will now receive compensation that they've earned and deserve. And we will also be able to celebrate on Veterans Day tomorrow the fact that we have passed the appropriations bill for the VA. And this would not have come about without the work of so many people, too numerous to mention. But I do want to thank my fellow appropriators, particularly the chairs of the three committees, Senator Bozeman, Senator Hoeven, and Senator Mullen, for their hard work. I want to thank our House counterparts, particularly Chairman Cole, who worked night and day with us on getting conference agreements, and our Democratic colleagues who courageously realized that we could not let this shutdown continue to go on with the harmful consequences growing worse with each passing day.
Welcome back to 45th Perspective, the channel where we break down the stories that matter most to America with facts, reason, and a love for this great country. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who still believes in accountability, freedom, and the values that made America great. And if you want to support the work we do here, our research, our independent analysis, and our mission to keep the conversation real, you can join our Patreon community at patreon.com/45th Perspective for as low as $5 a month. Every bit helps us keep pushing truth forward. Now, let's get into today's topic. This week, the Senate held a session that's drawn a lot of attention, a moment many in Washington are calling a victory for the American people. The senator from Maine took the floor to thank her colleagues, her staff, and even members from across the aisle for coming together to reopen the government after days of shutdown. She celebrated that federal employees who had been furloughed or forced to work without pay would now receive their compensation. She also highlighted that the appropriations bill for the Veterans Affairs Department had passed, something she described as fitting for Veterans Day. It was a speech filled with gratitude, bipartisanship, and praise for the so-called functioning of the Senate. But as someone who watches government not just for what it says, but for what it does, I think there's a lot more to unpack here.
I also want to particularly thank my staff. They literally went without sleep and worked continuously to do all that needed to be done. I want to thank Leader Thune and Leader Barrasso for their hard work and the work of their staff as well. So my list of gratitude could go on, but the hour is getting late, and I do want people to be able to go on home for the night and home, finally. Again, I think this is a great victory for the American people, and it shows that the Senate can work, that we can produce the results that are needed. I want to give a shout out to Senator Katie Britt, who is here this evening. She helped in so many ways with the negotiations. Senator Shaheen, Senator Kaine, Senator Angus King, my colleague, and the rest of the 8 Democrats who are willing to cross party lines for the good of the people of this country. So thank you, Mr. President, for all that has been done, and for your personal participation as well. I yield the floor.
Because while reopening the government sounds like good news, and yes, nobody wants a shutdown, we need to ask the bigger question. What actually changes? Who truly benefits? And are we celebrating competence or simply rewarding the same cycle of dysfunction that's been normalized in Washington for years? Let's take this piece by piece. When the senator stood up and said, "We're going to reopen government," it sounded like a moment of relief. After all, shutdowns hurt ordinary people, workers, small businesses that depend on federal contracts, families waiting on services. That's a fact. But here's the other side of it. A shutdown doesn't happen by accident. It's usually the last resort after months of failure to do the basic job Congress is elected to do: pass budgets and manage taxpayer dollars responsibly. So while I respect the senator's gratitude and the staff's hard work, the truth is, this is the bare minimum of governance. We shouldn't be applauding Washington for fixing a mess it created in the first place. Every time a shutdown happens, we hear the same script. We're grateful for bipartisan cooperation. This shows the system works. This is a victory for the American people. But if the system truly worked, we wouldn't keep running into shutdown threats year after year. We wouldn't have to wait until the 11th hour to fund essential parts of government. We wouldn't have federal workers going without pay or agencies scrambling to stay operational. So yes, reopening government is necessary, but it's not an achievement. It's a recovery from failure. Now, one part of the senator's speech that stood out to me was her mention of Veterans Day and the VA appropriations bill. She said it was fitting that on Veterans Day weekend, the Senate had passed a bill to ensure the VA was funded. On the surface, that's commendable. Nobody deserves our support more than the men and women who've served this country. But again, the timing raises questions. Why are we always celebrating last-minute fixes for veterans funding? Why isn't the VA one of the first priorities every year, rather than a political afterthought that gets mentioned only when it aligns with a holiday? A government that truly honors its veterans wouldn't use their funding as a talking point in the middle of a shutdown crisis. It would make sure their care, their benefits, and their support systems are ironclad, no matter what political drama unfolds in Washington. Because these are people who've kept their promises to America. The least Congress can do is keep its promise to them. Another part of the speech focused heavily on gratitude, thanking fellow senators, committee chairs, staff, and even the president for their roles in reaching an agreement. That's fine, professionalism matters. But there's a point where gratitude starts to sound like self-congratulation. It's as if the political class wants applause for finally doing its job after weeks of chaos. I respect civility, but I also believe in accountability. And accountability means asking, how did we get here? Why does it take a shutdown to get Congress to cooperate? Why do we celebrate bipartisan teamwork only when the government is on the verge of collapse? The senator from Maine said this proves that the Senate can work. That's an interesting phrase. Can work. It implies that for most of the time it doesn't. And that's the deeper issue. Congress is not supposed to function only in crisis mode. It's supposed to lead with foresight, discipline, and respect for taxpayers. But we've drifted so far from that ideal that even temporary fixes now feel like triumphs. When she thanked Democrats who crossed party lines, she praised them as courageous. That word stood out to me too. Courage is admirable. But again, the fact that it takes courage to do what's right for the American people, to simply govern responsibly, tells us everything about how broken Washington's culture has become. Doing your job shouldn't require courage. It should require integrity. Courage should be reserved for those standing against corruption, against bloated spending, against unelected bureaucracies that keep growing while accountability keeps shrinking. As a patriot, I believe in cooperation when it serves the people. But cooperation isn't the same as compromise on principles. There's a fine line between working across the aisle and simply blending into the same establishment that's been mismanaging this country's finances for decades. Every year we see the same pattern. Ballooning budgets, billions in waste, debt ceilings kicked down the road, and then politicians stepping in front of cameras to declare victory when the lights stay on for another few months. That's not leadership. That's survival. We need senators on both sides who are willing to address the real causes of these shutdowns: overspending, lack of fiscal discipline, and the absence of accountability. The American people are tired of being told that the solution to every crisis is more spending. We don't need government to grow larger. We need it to grow smarter. We don't need more committees or special sessions. We need a system that respects limits, both constitutional and financial. The senator's tone was optimistic, and that's good. We need optimism. But optimism without reflection leads to repetition. If we keep patting ourselves on the back for temporary solutions, nothing will change. The same people will be back on the Senate floor 6 months from now, giving the same speeches, thanking the same names, and celebrating the same kind of victory, while Americans continue to pay the price for Washington's dysfunction. Let's talk about the workers she mentioned, federal employees who will now receive back pay. They deserve that, absolutely. No American should be forced to work without pay. But we should also be honest about how we got there. The shutdown happened because leaders couldn't agree on a budget that balanced priorities with responsibility. It wasn't the fault of the workers. It wasn't the fault of the people. It was the fault of leadership that too often prioritizes politics over planning. In a country that spends trillions of dollars annually, there's no excuse for this kind of recurring chaos. Families have to budget responsibly. Small businesses have to make tough choices. Farmers, factory workers, teachers, they all have to live within their means. Why can't Washington do the same? When a household runs out of money, you cut back, you plan, you adjust. You don't keep borrowing and calling it progress. The senator ended her remarks by calling this a victory for the American people. I want to believe that, but I think the American people will call it a victory when Washington starts putting their needs before its own image. A real victory would be seeing a budget passed months in advance, not at midnight before a shutdown. A real victory would be cutting waste, reducing debt, and making sure the next generation isn't burdened by the reckless spending of the current one. A real victory would be restoring faith in institutions that seem more interested in self-preservation than service. Let's give credit where it's due. The Senate avoided further damage. That's good. But avoiding damage is not the same as building progress. The people are looking for solutions, not speeches. They want to see government function efficiently, transparently, and fairly. And for that to happen, there has to be a change in mindset, from crisis management to consistent leadership. I also noticed the senator thanked the president for his participation. That's polite, but I think it's fair to question how much leadership we've really seen from the executive branch during this process. Leadership means taking responsibility, not waiting for pressure to mount. Leadership means setting priorities, not reacting to emergencies. And lately, it feels like Washington only acts when the consequences become unbearable. That's not governing, that's firefighting. We have to start asking why this keeps happening. Why, after decades of experience and thousands of staff members, Congress still can't pass a budget on time. Why agencies continue to grow while oversight continues to shrink. Why we accept chaos as normal and stability as a surprise. That's not the America our founders envisioned. They built a system of checks and balances, yes, but they also believed in efficiency, prudence, and duty. The Senate's job is not to congratulate itself for functioning. It's to ensure that government serves the people, not the other way around. One of the things I've noticed in moments like this is how often politicians use words like bipartisanship as shields. They use it to deflect criticism, as if the mere act of cooperation automatically justifies the outcome. But bipartisanship is only valuable if the outcome strengthens the country. If both parties come together to expand spending, weaken accountability, or ignore the long-term debt crisis, then bipartisanship isn't a virtue, it's collusion. What America needs is principled cooperation, working together when it's right, standing firm when it's not. When you step back and look at the big picture, this Senate hearing and the speech that followed are part of a larger pattern. Every time the government nears shutdown, the same political theater plays out. Urgent negotiations, dramatic statements, late-night votes, and then a collective sigh of relief when the lights stay on. And after that, Washington moves on as if nothing happened. Meanwhile, the debt grows, the bureaucracy expands, and the same cycle repeats. But the American people aren't fooled anymore. They see through the theater. They know that what's missing isn't cooperation, it's conviction. What's missing isn't staff effort, it's accountability. What's missing isn't gratitude, it's genuine reform. At45th perspective, we believe in shining a light on these patterns. We're not here to bash individuals, but to highlight the system that keeps producing the same results. Because at the end of the day, it's not about one senator or one speech. It's about what this moment says about where our country is headed. Are we content with short-term fixes, or are we ready for long-term solutions? If there's a lesson to take from this Senate moment, it's that America still works when people push back against apathy. We have the power to demand better leadership, better management, and better respect for the Constitution. We have the right to expect more than crisis-driven governance. And we have the duty to hold our leaders accountable not just for what they say, but for what they do when the cameras are off. That's what patriotism really means. Not blind loyalty to government, but love for the principles that define our republic. It means standing firm on values like fiscal responsibility, limited government, personal liberty, and national strength. It means believing that America doesn't need to be managed, it needs to be led. So as the Senate pats itself on the back tonight, let's keep our eyes on the bigger mission, restoring common sense in Washington. Because if we don't demand it, nobody else will. The same politicians who celebrate reopening government today will be back tomorrow asking for more spending, more borrowing, and more excuses. And the only way to stop that cycle is through vigilance, by citizens who are informed, involved, and unafraid to speak up. That's why this channel exists, to give voice to the Americans who feel unheard, to analyze what's really happening beyond the headlines, and to remind everyone that this country still belongs to the people. Not the bureaucrats, not the lobbyists, not the political elite, the people. If you agree with that mission, make sure you're subscribed to 45th Perspective. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive. And if you'd like to support the work we do, the research, the writing, the effort to stay independent, you can become a supporter on Patreon for just $5 a month at patreon.com/45th Perspective. It might seem small, but it makes a huge difference in keeping the truth alive. To everyone watching, thank you for taking the time to think critically, to question respectfully, and to believe in something bigger than partisan politics. America's strength has never been in its politicians, it's in its people. And as long as we stay informed, united in purpose, and grounded in principle, this country will always find its way forward. This has been 45th Perspective, where we don't just report, we reason. Stay sharp, stay free, and God bless the United States of America.